week, right? We midweek Wednesday here, and I was just thinking about, of all of places you could be, at the click of a, or even at the drop of a dime. You can be anywhere in the world, and you chose to be here today. So I really appreciate. Looking forward to an engaging, interactive conversation around strengths-based leadership from a virtual landscape. My intention for today's conversation is really to share ways on how best to strengthen your leadership skills, especially from a virtual standpoint. You think about how many Zoom calls you've already been on this week, and you've been planning for the coming week. It's helpful to know kind of what is it that you're bringing to the table as it relates to strength, as well as what are some things you can work on. So my hope is that you will take away at least one thought, item, idea to not only share with your team, but think about your own individual development. What is it that you know that you want to work on? So just to begin engaging, which we talked about, right, making sure this is interactive, I wanted to just start off before we dive into the topic of strengths-based leadership, asking a question. For those of you who've attended a National Black MBA conference, and let's hopefully that's everyone on the call, what's been one of your most memorable ones and why? And if you could respond to that question in the chat box. Robin has been so gracious enough to help facilitate that for me. So if you take a couple of minutes to answer the question, when was your most memorable National Black MBA conference and why?
Right now, we just have one response, and that was Atlanta 2014.
Okay. Just one. What about yours, Robin?
Yes, I had Atlanta 2014, and for me, that was my very first conference.
Oh,
so that's what makes it very memorable for me, because it was the first. And after that one, I decided that I would not miss another one. At all. And I see some others here. Another person said, my first conference, seeing all the successful people willing to help others. Daryl says 2014 Atlanta. That conference was really something, because that year he fully vested in the conference experience and started volunteering with the workshops. So the Atlanta conference for me personally was really something that was great. Another person says 2017 in Philly, my first conference, a lot of great leaders represented. So another person says, I've not yet attended a conference, but hope to attend in the future. Yes. That was Chandra. So we have different responses here.
That's good.
Atlanta seems to be the one that was most memorable for a lot of people. So
yeah, that's good. That's great to know. And I missed it. I missed that one. So, but I will say for me, and I'm thinking back, it might have been 2015. I had an opportunity to attend. I believe it was in Orlando. But the reason why it was most memorable is because Stephen Covey was a leader of one of the breakout sessions. He hadn't just released his book, he was releasing his second book, but his first book, The Speed of Trust, is what he talked about in terms of the strategy session, and he was really promoting his second book, Smart Trust. So I just wanted to get us making sure, for one, not only we can hold on to the memories as we're reflective about what's going on, but making sure your chat works. So when I pose some similar questions in a couple of minutes, I want to be able to make sure that you're able to respond. So thank you for that. Okay, so for our time today, we're going to talk about, I'm going to share with you, first starting off with what is leadership. We talk about strengths-based leadership. I think it's important to have a foundation of really understanding. So when we say leadership, what that is, I'm going to cover with you 3 strength-based leadership levers. And these, the first one as it relates to strength, I'm pulling that out of the Strengths-Based Leadership by Tom Rath. We're also going to talk about blind spots, and then with those two levers, how do you begin to rise to your potential? I'm also going to share with you some information about trends, right? You think about what is it you want to be, what is it you need to be, and how do you best facilitate and maneuver through all the ambiguity? How do you begin to be the best leader you can be and really understand some of the trends that are coming? And you probably have already experienced some of them and get an opportunity to talk through that as well. And definitely want to leave time for Q&A. So what is a leader? This is a picture of myself and Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown, who I had an opportunity to meet last year, and not only got to meet her, but also had an opportunity to become certified trainer under one of her pegs around leadership, Dare to Lead. She's written many books. She's a researcher, studies really what makes a leader. How do you move from kind of armored leadership, having everything together, the pretension of that you have everything together, to moving to a daring leader. And in that experience, she shared many things, but one of the things I want to talk about today, or at least give us a foundation to move our conversation forward, is the definition of a leader. She states that a leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes, and who has the courage to develop that potential. So key things is really recognizing the potential in people, and also one of the things to remember as a leader doesn't necessarily, you don't have to have a title to be a leader. You can work on a project, you could be facilitating conversations, but knowing that the key thing as it relates to, especially our conversation today, strengths-based leadership, it is the responsibility of the leader to really hone in on what that person does well. So another opportunity to join in on the chat. This time, the question is centered around, if you think about a leader who's had a positive impact on your career, what strengths did they have? And if you would answer this question as well in the chat box, think about a leader who's had a positive impact on your career. What specific strengths, competencies, or skill sets did they have that made them a great leader? And if you could list those in the chat. I keep relying on Robin to help me. So, what specific strengths?
No responses yet.
Okay.
Still waiting. Everyone, please make sure your phones are on mute. I'm checking to make sure to see if I need to put anybody on mute. Thank you. Charisma, command, all of the things accomplished under leadership and how confident a person is. Lead by example, servant leader, great motivator. Yes. One of the greatest leaders I ever experienced was transparent, brutally honest, and a genuine giver of information. Good communicator, supportive and knowledgeable. Transparent, provided direction. Very genuine.
Yes.
Accountable. Leaders who have challenged me to step out of my comfort zone, challenged me to be more strategic when presenting to senior leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I think what I heard, thank you for that, Robin. More often than not, right? Strategic, authenticity, right? Transparency. All of these things help to encompass, leadership. And you remember those things because that person has had, it might have been more than one. So this may be someone you've had in the past or even current day. The strengths that if you think about it, even the ones that you see on your screen, they've empowered, they've inspired you. All of those things encompass what is it that makes them that, and part of it is understanding the strengths that they bring and how they best share that with you on your leadership journey as well. it's going to be important to remember these strengths as we go forward. So, oh, go ahead. Did you have a question, Robin?
No.
Okay. So when we talk about the three strengths-based leadership levers, are what I'm going to share with you today. The first one being strengths. We'll talk about what that looks like a little bit more in depth with not only just the definition or descriptors of strengths, but then how do you begin to work on your own strengths? And even if you don't know what your strengths are, I'm going to share just some thoughts about tools that you can actually use to best work on your strengths. Then we'll shift to the second lever, which is blind spots. And then having strengths and blind spots in front of us in our back pockets, we'll be able to figure out, okay, how do we best rise from this? What do we do with this information, even as early as today? How do I begin to use these tools to further strengthen myself as a leader from a virtual landscape? So let's start with the first one, strengths-based leadership. And as I mentioned, these next three bullet points, as it relates to the topics, I've pulled from the strengths-based leadership of Tom Rath, but I've added kind of what my own experience has been to make it a little bit more relatable to the workplace and the workspace today. The first one is, as it relates to strength, is really investing in your strengths, whether it be yourself, individual contributor, or as a team. There's numerous strengths assessments out there. Some of these you may be familiar with. Myers-Briggs, a lot of focus around, lately I've seen around Enneagram. Our genetics tends to be, can you guys still hear me okay? Okay, there we go. Emergenetics, and that's one of my favorite ones. Very similar to Myers-Briggs, but it's a study of how your brain shows up at work. Some of you may be familiar with DISC. One resource that I want to share with you that I've recently been a part of is called Standout Assessment. Standout Assessment. And this assessment is a free assessment online. Marcus Buckingham has actually provided this as a tool while we've been in quarantine. He is actually the author of Go Put Your Strengths to Work. It may take all of 15 minutes to complete, and you actually get a 14-page document on your strengths and how best to use those. When you think about investing in your strengths, I would also encourage you to, and one of the reasons why I asked you is to think about the conferences you've attended. One option is to attend webinars such as this. The National NBMBAA, especially the Memphis chapter, has done a great job, phenomenal job of providing resources to all business professionals or even professionals looking to grow in their careers and further develop their careers. And again, most of this, if not all, are free opportunities. Not sure what the future is going to look like for any conference, but know that let's be on the lookout for the National NBMBAA. My experience, each time I've attended, I've walked away with tools that help me further develop in my career and help me think about what is it I want to go do next. And so I would encourage you to do the same, especially I think a couple of you mentioned you hadn't had an opportunity to attend. Also, hopefully within this last couple of months, if you either thought about or have on your to-do list as far as a career goal, is really look at what education do I want to explore? Is there some skill set that I haven't yet developed? If I think about what is it that I want to do in my career, what do I want to go do next? Sometimes an advanced degree is helpful in that pursuit. Also, certification, right? You think about what is it that you want to go do next. I'm going to share with you not only just the trends, but understanding what skill sets you're going to need going forward. And sometimes a certification is helpful in doing that, right? And it's not just adding something to your resume for the sake of adding something to your resume. You want to be intentional about that. I remember back in 2008, that's when I started my business, Essence of Coaching. And that, if you recall, that was the time when the economy tanked. And everyone was asking, how would you leave your corporate job and go start your own business? Well, for me, it was really trying to understand and really expand my business and it's beyond the four walls. I wanted to do more and help people more. And so moving from HR into the next role, phase in my career, I was already coaching the teams that I supported, but I didn't just want to be a coach. I wanted to be certified coach. And so that is the one step that I took, investing in my career as it relates to strengths. Additionally, we talk about investing in your strengths and not only just for yourself and for your team, attending podcasts and reading. Those of you who know me well know that I enjoy reading as much as I can. I try to read those or be intentional about the reading that I do. Some fun, some not so much. One book that I recently read, Alicia Keys, Her More Than Myself, really just talks about not just what she's done in her career today, but how did she get there? What are the things that she had in her mind or the barriers that prevented her from being the person that she is today, the artist that she is today?
Hey, Sonia?
Yes.
We do have a couple of comments, questions. The name of the online survey again?
Yes, it's called Stand Out Assessment.
Stand Out Assessment.
Yes, and it's by Marcus Buckingham.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And the second question is, someone asked, what about Strength Finders as far as a tool to know where you lie with your strengths, the Strength Finders tool?
I think that's helpful. It's definitely a resource. You know, for me, I'm trying to find out the next one, right? What's the new and improved one? And Strength Finders, I think, was the beginning of what Tom did. And then since that time, he wrote the book, Strengths-Based Leadership. So it's one thing to know your strengths, but what are you going to do once you have that information? And I found that strength-based leadership is a more relevant reading and periodical for me right now. But definitely a resource. It might be a great starting point because it does offer a passcode in the back where you get an opportunity once you buy the book to go online and do an assessment as well. Great question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm, thank you. Okay, so the last point I just wanted to make, and I was listening or talking about the books or getting ready to dive into a conversation about books, or podcasts and other readings that you may be interested in. So you think about podcasts. So one of my favorite, not so much, but one of the ones I've been listening to is Unlocking Us. Brene Brown has that podcast. I know there's others out there. When we talk about interactive, especially our conversation today, if you would also, my next question, share some either podcasts or books that you are listening to, or at least have it on your list to work on as it relates to your strengths. Any podcasts or books? And if you would list those in the chat as well. And while you're gathering your answers for that, I did want to just mention the 3 books that you see over there, The Art of Gathering, Emotional Agility, and The Gift of Presence, are really true books that I have on my desk to read. But the one I just want to draw attention to is The Gift of Presence. And this is really just even the cover itself, the inside cover. I was drawn to it because it talks about the gift of presence. If you think about everything that's going on right now and really trying to identify ways to not only just find calm, but find purpose, she lists three different kind of intentions as it relates to how do you strengthen your abilities around purpose, pivoting, and pacing. Purpose, really understanding the meaning of what gets you going. Pivoting, right, which we've all had to do in some way, shape, or form, whether it have been now in the last couple of months or in the future. And then lastly, the pacing, right? Knowing that you can't do everything at the same time. I think the space that we're in now, we've all had to take a pause and really figure out, okay, how do we reset? How to rewire, right? Move away from that whole busyness and really just, observe what's around us and take it in, take it all in.
Hey,
So let me
Sonia, we have
pause.
some comments.
Please.
So we have a book by Kim Scott, Radical Candor,
Yes.
and the podcast by Kim Scott. We have C4 Leadership by Chris Winton, C for Leadership by Chris Winton. And then we also have Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. We all know about Simon.
Yes, Simon's good.
Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, Marilee Adams.
Yes.
And then Bring Your Whole Self to Work, Mike Robbins. These look like some great recommendations.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. And then, Robin, just to clarify, is there any way everyone can see that post today? Like, we'll be able to capture that information from the chat?
Yes, we can capture the chat information is being captured. We can send that back out to participants, as well as the session is being recorded today.
Oh,
and we will be resharing the link as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, first one, invest in your strengths. And the next one under strengths-based leadership is making sure you have the right people working on the right things so you can maximize the team, right? So remember our definition of leader, right? Seeing the potential in people. One of the things that I had an opportunity to do is partner with one of the leaders at FedEx. And one of the things she found is, hey, we have some gaps in our leadership. How can I best support my management team and ensure that they're ready for the future? My goal is that, 2, 3, 4 years down, I'm going to go and do something different. And I want to make sure that my team is ready and equipped to do that. So understanding what your team needs are and realizing, there may be some resources if you're working in the office or in the workplace that it may be necessary to go external and get resources. Also, I've also had an opportunity to participate in talent reviews. And I will tell you, the talent reviews are eye-opening, right? The talent reviews is an opportunity, or really the talent reviews, for those who don't know, are where the senior leaders of the organization come together and really assess the talent in the organization. And they look at the talent pipeline and say, okay, based upon performance and behaviors, how are each one of our employees, for the people who are represented around the room, how would you rate them? If you had to use a 9 box or you had to give some feedback on how they're doing, the talent reviews is the space in which they do that. And oftentimes, that's where the strengths get pulled out, right? Sonia worked on this project, or Daryl or Robin, they worked on this particular project, and this is what I remember. The one thing I want to make sure or reemphasize as a result of attending these talent reviews is you want your reputation to precede you. Everyone around the table may or may not know you. And if you don't have someone speaking on your behalf, it's important to get to know someone who does. And I'll be talking about stakeholders in a few minutes. Oftentimes we've heard this notion of, it's all about who you know. Well, I will just challenge you and say, it's all about who knows you. You want to be able to position yourself to not only know your strengths, but if you think about your team, how can I help my team? Not only just the visibility and getting them on projects, but how can I strengthen what they know, what are they doing really well? The next point is around energy bus. And so for those of you who like to read as well, John Gordon has a series of books, and one of them is around the energy bus. So if you think of yourself as a leader and using that whole definition that we talked about earlier, there are many people along the way, right, as he takes this ride, they get on the bus, and you're able to see kind of what is it that they bring. But there's others who may be challenged, and we'll talk about blind spots in just a second. But it's knowing who needs to get on the bus. And the energy bus also references those energy vampires, which he calls them and names them, those who are actually taking the energy away from the team. And it's important to know the difference between those two. The last thing around strength-based leadership as it relates to the right people and maximizing the team is don't lose sight of your values. Most organizations have values. They either have them in their lobby, on their badge, and I'm gonna share with you a company that recently I visited and want to talk to you about that. But don't lose sight of, one, there's organizational values, but staying true to your own personal values is going to be helpful. And then when you think about even broader and expand that to your team, what values do they have? What are they bringing? How does that align with the organizational values? Is important. Earlier this year, I had an opportunity to visit the Container Store. I won't say organization was it wasn't a New Year's resolution. I do try and work to be organized, but I wanted to go and just get a little bit more tools to help me in my office space. And this is on their back wall. They have 7 foundation principles. And the one I wanted to pull out today that I thought was relevant for our conversation as it relates to strengths-based leadership is communication is leadership. This is their foundation, second principle. And it says, we believe in practicing consistent, reliable, predictable, effective, thoughtful, compassionate, and courteous communication. That's the principle. Which word in that foundation principle do you think is integral to the communication store ensuring that they live out this value? Which specific word, and if I need to go back, I can't, but within the we believe in practicing consistent, reliable, predictable, which word do you think is going to be critical or important as they move forward to making sure they carry out this value, this principle of communication as leadership? I'll pause again for the chat box.
Consistent, practicing, consistent, reliable, consistent, a lot of consistence.
A lot of consistence.
Practicing.
Practicing is the
compassionate.
The word. Compassionate, yes. All of those are necessary, right? When they talk about what communication and leadership is, those are great descriptors for them. But if you don't practice that, then guess what? It's just another value on the wall. And that's one of the things that Brene has talked about in her work and other leaders as well, that there's not this gauzy value. There's not this value that's listed on the wall that you're actually putting into practice. So while the whole goal is to not just have communication as a word on the wall, but that we begin to practice, continue to practice, and that we don't lose sight of it as we go forth in leadership. Okay, next one, followers' needs. In the book, Strengths-Based Leadership, the last component of that is they looked at what 10,000 followers, like who follows influential leaders, and how do you understand, what is the way, why do they follow, what are the needs that followers have based upon the people that they follow? And these are the 4 that are listed in the book: compassion, hope, stability, and trust. Compassion, right? Extending grace. As we talk about working from a virtual landscape or virtual place, how do you assume people are doing the best they can? And extending grace. We're all hopeful, right? That this, where we are now, will not be where we will be always, but understanding that, as the leader, it's incumbent upon you to not have all the answers and not always provide or have this notion of a rainbow, but knowing that, hey, we're looking for some stability, and it's incumbent upon going back to the stability, the point about communication. I encourage you to share what you know, as much as you know, as often as you know, right? So even if you don't have information, share that, or commit to what timing, how often, the frequency of when you'll be able to share, especially if there's been movement in terms of the delivery of how we're going to, depending upon what service that you're in, but depending on a company that you support, what is it going to look like going forward, keeping people in the know. And trust, is it given or is it earned? There's always, that can always be up for debate, but realizing that there's many leaders who've done work around, in addition to Brene, Stephen Covey, as I mentioned, talk about the speed of trust is the one thing that changes everything. And as you think about all these needs, I don't see that you can have one without the other, okay? So we talked about strengths, and I want to shift us now, after I read my quote from my book, right? As a manager, aim high, ask wide, chapter 3, there's a quote. It says, as a manager, it is your responsibility to know everyone on the team, how they can communicate to the success of the team. Effective leaders allow great people to do the work they're going to do. Important to remember. Blind spots, right? So you think about blind spots. What may be prohibiting you from reaching the next goal, or what's prohibiting you from getting to the place where you're trying to go as it relates to your career? Oftentimes, we may or may not see these blind spots, and that's why they call it blind spots. You may have gotten feedback, though, about how are you showing up in the workplace? How are you showing up virtually? We're going to talk about that on the next slide. But indirect and direct feedback, consider it a gift, because that is an opportunity for people to give you information about how you are showing up. And a Leadership 360, where you have an opportunity to get feedback from those you come in contact with, whether it be internal and external, to help you, right? Your blind spots are a way to say, hey, I do strengths, I have strengths, I'm very astute into what I do well, but there's some things I need to work on, and having an opportunity to know what those are very helpful. I listed culture on here because I think it's important just to remember that we all have culture that's not always defined or listed in your employee handbook, but there is a way in which companies do things. And knowing how you can best maneuver through that is very helpful. It's important to know your culture. I listed this quote on here from Scottie Pippen. Sometimes a player's greatest challenge is coming to grips with his role on the team. For those of you who watched The Last Dance, you may understand that Scottie didn't always get the best light, but I wanted to give him credit for this quote because it just talks about, hey, you may want to be the lead on a project, or you didn't get that opportunity. And it doesn't mean it's no always, but it's equipping yourself to really understand, what do you do well and what do you not do so well? And asking for the feedback, right? But also the feed forward gives you an opportunity to say, okay, what do I need to do in the future? What are some of the things that I need to work on? Most of my clients reach out to me, and again, a coach is not necessarily a bad thing, but a coach is an accountability partner, right? Which can help you figure out, what are the triggers? How we're showing up in the workplace of yesterday or even 2 months ago is a lot different than the virtual landscape we're in today. Some people it's the same, but being able to figure out, okay, that's different. Things have changed. And so how do you do that? And if there's triggers that are happening as you're working, how do you work through that? Utilizing an executive coach can help you. I'm a big proponent of being your authentic self, but that calls for you to know who you are and where you want to be. I'm all about being authentic, not putting on a facade, because sometimes we've been known to do that. At least I have, right? This whole notion early in my career, this fake it till you make it, which was really didn't make sense. At the time, in my mind, I thought it was the way or the approach that I needed to take, but it wasn't helpful, because guess what? I had questions, and fake it till you make it doesn't allow you to ask the questions that you need to do. Is the pretentious of that, I have to pretend as if I have everything going on. Utilizing a coach can help you figure that out. So staying true to yourself is all about this authentic self, and the executive coach can help you bring those things to light. I just wanted to share with you some thoughts around, we talk about strengths and blind spots. Self-awareness is found, right? It was named the most important capability for leaders to develop. And if you think about poorly performing companies, employees are 79% more likely to have low morale, self-awareness than those firms with a robust rate of return, right? You want people to stay engaged. And part of that is knowing what they bring to the table, but also have a self-awareness when they have opportunities for development. Here's some of the trends that I found recently that you may have already, you may be in a space, you may be working on projects as it relates to some of these. The first one is around digital transformation. You think about, how do we predict what's coming forward? That's a proactive approach that may or may not, if you see the race with no finish line, we're getting better at our technology, but knowing even with everything that's going on, Zoom, Skype, all the different platforms out there, they weren't prepared, right? And so how do you get ahead of that? Well, part of it is really understanding things are changing. That's the one constant we know for sure. If we don't know anything else, we know that change is constant. And so how do you embrace that, right? How do you move yourself through the whole SARA model, which is SARA? First, there's shock, the S. The A is anger, right? I may still be upset about how things are going. R is the resistance, and then the final A is acceptance, right? I may not necessarily agree, but I have to accept, okay, this is how things are. And the importance of that is not only yourself, but how do you get your team moving in the direction of how can we best move forward? The other thing I wanted to share as it relates to trends, which I've seen a lot about, is around reskilling and upskilling. Reskilling, learning new skills for a new position, as well as upskilling, right? Taking current skills and refining them. If you think about just some of the companies out there who were doing one thing and then quickly had to shift to doing something else. It's important to not only have the skill sets that you have, but understand what is going to be needed in the future. Study your industry, study the trends, find out, okay, is my role going to be broadened? Is there something else I want to do? If I'm at a fork in the road and I'm trying to decide which way I want to go, be intentional about understanding what's going on in your field, what's important in your industry. What are your leaders? What are your managers telling you about what's important? I'll share this one quote for you from the Chief Learning Officer, which says, by 2013, 375 million workers may need to switch their occupations in response to digitization, automation, and advances in artificial intelligence that are disrupting the way we work. If this quote is in fact true, how are you preparing yourself for that? How are you preparing your team? Right? I'm working with a couple clients now, and we're looking at not only just where to have a strategic planning retreat, but we're looking beyond, right, 2 and 5 years. You need to be thinking about what is it that is going to be needed in the future as the leader. And then don't forget about the team. What skill sets are going to be necessary? I know the skill sets that I have today are going to need to be refined. I need to figure out how can I best keep up with technology and the digitization that I just mentioned. So Sonia, you shared strengths, ways in which we can strengthen that. The second lever was around blind spots. So how do we take all of that and begin to rise to your potential? The first one is relationship building, right? Utilizing this time to further build relationships from a virtual workspace, right? If the landscape says that we now have to be in front of each other on a screen, right? And that we don't get to see each other and meet somewhere that may be coming. But for now, who can you strengthen relationships with? Stakeholders in the organization. What about your colleagues? People you need to reach out to. Maybe other, people who may be interested in your role, right? You as a leader, thinking about who may be wanting to join your team, being open to that, right? And I challenge you, and I listed this on here, to identify one skill you want to work on, something you want to build in the next 21 days. As you talk about building relationships, understand that it's not all about you, right? As much as you may want to, most days, you may figure that out. But how do you build relationships beyond the role that you're in? I always tell leaders that you can't lead behind the desk. You've got to get out there. And so now if your desk is virtual, how do you reach? How do you stretch that leadership muscle to further refine not only your skill sets, but the team? Rising to your potential encompasses making sure you are the resource, right? Be a resource. Most companies, most teams are looking at ways of how do we re-enter? What do we do? How do we do this? So if you can be a resource, whether it be a news article, whether it be some stats or some data around how do we do this, coming with your recommendations is going to be helpful. Someone shared an article with me, and I'll share this with you too. It was from the New York Times. What if you don't want to go back to the office? It's an interesting read because you think about everyone may not want to go back into the office. And so how do we do that? How do you share? How do we collaborate and share these best practices? Because guess what? We're probably not the only ones devising, developing what is going to be our go-forward plan. The last point I have for rising to your potential is centered around saboteurs and sage. Knowing that we can be our own saboteurs. We think about, as leaders, are we doing the right thing? Have we equipped ourselves enough? We can even be, business owners, right? And looking and saying, okay, what do I do now, right? If part of my role was to facilitate workshops, which part of my role was facilitate workshops in person, and the other part was virtually with coaching clients. Well, that's great, but had to make a shift, right? And part of that shift was, hey, how do I best collaborate with some of my other colleagues without putting things in my mind? That self-saboteur is when you put ideas in your mind that are not necessarily true. And if we can get to a point where, again, we're moving to sage, where we can savor in, hey, here's what you do well, surrounding ourselves with people who have positive energy, talking to ourselves, right? Like we talk to our friends when things come up, we have triggers, even happy stories. Collectively, we all win when we come together. I saw this quote by Jay Friedman and thought it was pertinent for our conversation today. And maybe Rob would have to tell me if I can keep going, if I need to end with this quote. But relationships are built on 4 pillars: trust, knowledge, commitment, and respect. You can ask how leaders achieve any of these 4, and the answer is that they just demonstrate the other 3. Relationships are key. Utilize this time. I encourage you to utilize this time to further build relationships as you look to rise to your potential. I do want to pause again and see if there's any questions before I ask my last question.
So any questions that you have for Sonia, go ahead. As we have almost 15 minutes left, we want to make sure that anybody that has questions, we can do some Q&A before she finishes up. So anybody that has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Can everybody hear clearly? We had a couple people said they were having a little bit of trouble hearing, and then some people said they weren't experiencing. Okay, yes, everybody can hear well. Great. Any questions for Sonia?
Well, I have one.
Okay.
It's the next one.
All right.
Right. So I've shared strengths, right? We've shared blind spots. We've talked about that. So what are you going to take away, right? So one of the big, as I talked earlier, was my intention is that you walk away with at least one thing. And while I've shared a lot of information in a short period of time, I do want to be intentional about asking you, okay, so what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with information? So if you have one key takeaway, if you would list that in the chat box. And or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Okay, focus on becoming more self-aware. Big takeaway, the books that are shared. So the books that were shared, key for some people in order to help increase their information level.
Yes.
Teamwork makes the dream work, especially with outstanding leadership.
Agree.
So here's a question. You mentioned fake it till you make it is a thing of the past. How do you make the shift to the real you, but not shock the workforce?
But not shock, what? One more time.
But not shock the workforce.
Oh, great question. Yes, I don't know. Let me just clarify. I don't know if it's a thing in the past because some of my clients are still in the space of faking it. I'm trying to help them. We're working towards really, I think part of it is really understanding who do you want to be? And in defining who you want to be, right, know that you got to stay true to yourself. But part of that is knowing the environment that you're working in. I talked about the culture. It's important to know the culture in which you work, right? So some things you don't do, right? Because there's that culture, those unwritten rules or those norms that you don't always see. But you can still be who you are. But staying true to you is knowing that, okay, let me know within the parameters in which I work, right? The people that I work around, the people that I support, the people that I report to, being cognizant of that. You don't have to lose who you are. You don't have to be fake and phony. You can be true to who you are, but just know that there's barriers, there's boundaries. Knowing that, I think, is going to be helpful. Great question, though.
We also had some other comments. One person said they really thought the assessment tool and the coaching was good. Reaching out to those persons who have strength and leadership capabilities that they admire for support. Really listening for things I need to strengthen to make me better, the feedback. Emotional intelligence. Knowledge is power, knowing your colleagues, team, environment, yourself, and how you can improve in all areas. And focusing on developing a new skill to remain current.
Yes.
And I'm going to add one as well, transferable skills. So for those that are thinking about perhaps shifting gears, this is probably one of the best times, if any, missed the times to, if you're looking to shift gears, let's say you want to go from marketing to IT or IT to marketing or something like that. It's a good time to look at what's transferable. What can you transfer over that will be applicable into other skill sets? So I think knowing how to identify, understanding what those are, and knowing how those can transfer is probably really good to do as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the time. And there is no magic start time, right? In terms of when you get started, just start now, start little, start small, start big, start large, but just start. I think it's the key thing, really understanding. That's what I talked earlier about. Do your research. Do your research. There is, and I always say, right, the National Black MBA Memphis, they put on a ton of workshops, right? And it's incumbent upon you, not only just theirs, but others, we can reach out and further develop. That's a network in itself. So if you're interested in doing something different, right, if you know someone that's in that space already, reach out to them. Find out, how do they do it? What do they need to do? What are some things I need to consider? Staying curious and asking why is important.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for Sonia? We still have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I wanted to, you said something too that made me think about, I think a couple people actually had said about the books, and the books list is just, again,
Yes.
everyone might be a reader. You may want, you may do Kindle or you listen to them in the car, but just knowing, it's not so much about quantity, but it's just figuring out what works for you. How do you best strengthen your leadership muscle? And I think gone are the days of just waiting for information to come to you. You have to take charge of your career, take charge of your development. I believe companies have a responsibility to provide the resources as best as they can, right? The budget money may or may not be there, but in spite of that, how do you strengthen your own leadership muscle to understand, what do I need to work on? Part of that is understanding what is it that you bring to the table and how can you help contribute? Knowing your strengths, knowing your blind spots, and being true, to yourself about that, right? Sometimes we get feedback that may not be as comfortable for us, right? But we still have to figure out how can we best move forward. Sometimes we get put on projects, right? Because of our strengths, and that goes back to this whole fake it till you make it concept, which, hey, I may not have all the answers and I keep getting put on projects because of my strengths, but be clear about too, what else do you want to work on? One of the things that came out of the management boot camp is we can promote people to management level positions. We don't always give them the skills in order to be successful, right? So utilizing that whole space of being clear about who you are, being empathetic about that with your team. I do believe when we take the approach of people are doing the best they can, it's helpful. It's helpful. It helps to underline this whole foundation of stress. I'll share a quick story because we do have a couple more minutes. When we're talking about trust, I remember probably 22 years ago. And I remember it because my anniversary is coming up, June 20th, 22 years ago. I did the top 3 stressors out of 10, right? I started a new job, we moved, and I got married. And I remember 6 months into that role, the president and CEO of that time, that's Gerber Baby Food, and he said we were going to be merging with Novartis Consumer Health. And for me, at that time, it's like, wow, just started this new job. And fortunately for me, my job wasn't impacted, but I remember that story in the president as it relates to his leadership, because he committed to telling us what he knew. Everything that's going to relate to this merger in your position, just know I will be communicating that. Even if I don't have anything to communicate, I will communicate that to you as well. I'll tell you as much as I know when I can tell you, and you can be assured that taking care of you, right? This family business, think about Gerber, was a family-owned business. And so how do you do that? You start with trust. He built the trust over time because he was transparent and authentic, with his communications. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome session. Thanks, Sonia. That was one of our comments. It has been amazing. You have given us definitely some great information and tools, books, information, assessment, surveys, and tools that we can use. And this has definitely been something that can help us for those of us that are navigating through how can we build up our strengths during this time. And this is a perfect time for any type of learning on any level. So we really thank you. Another awesome presentation. All right, great. So Sonia,
Yes.
Excellent session, another excellent session. So how can folks reach out to you? If anybody wants to do any follow-up with you, how can they reach out to you? How can you be found?
Great segue.
Yay, perfect.
Right? I'm not on all the social media. Just know that. Anybody knows me. I'm not on all of them, but the ones I stay true to, I'm always open to an email, and by that way, LinkedIn, Instagram. And then know that, hey, if you want more of this or more of the same, one of the things that, in addition to the Calm Connection coaching that I did last month, going into next month, I'm really going to spend more time just diving into this whole transformational leadership. It's one thing to have a call, it's another thing to participate on the webinar. And I'm so thankful everyone was fully engaged in our conversation today. But how do you put this into practice? What are some of the steps you can do? And wanted to offer that to this team, right? This National Black MBA webinar. I do want to offer the 20% discount. You can go to my website and we can talk more. But thank you for that. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Daryl, and the whole National Black MBA Memphis chapter. I appreciate the time today.
All right. Daryl, you want to close us out?
Yes, I want to thank again everybody for joining. Again, first and foremost, please stay safe. Keep the social distancing. Of course, I'm sure everybody is aware of what's going on in our country right now. So please be prayerful and vigilant, and just, tomorrow's never promised. I'll just leave it at that. But also want to just, again, thank everybody for joining. I want to keep this short. Please be on the lookout. We are advertisements and announcements will be coming out hopefully by early next week, but we are looking to have our MBA open house. Again, I always say, you don't have to have an MBA to be in an organization. We look for business-minded individuals, but we definitely promote degrees in business related backgrounds. And so we will have a virtual MBA open house next month. So look forward to hearing about that, seeing that, and please, thank you guys. Everyone enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.